Feuds and honor killings were commonplace in Appalachia after the Civil War, most of them sparked by that war between former friends and family caused by the terrible divisions in our country at that time. Today we tell one of those stories from Southwest Virginia and East Tennessee. Hello folks, I'm Steve Gilley, along with Rod Mullins, and this is Stories, a History of Appalachia.
You know, Steve, there were a lot of blood feuds during the Civil War between friends and family. Yeah, pretty much between families. But, you know, after the Civil War was settled, you know, the blood feuds went on between family members and also between friends for a very long time.
Yeah, they did. That's basically what we called feuds, like the Hatfields and McCoys and several others that we've talked about over the course of this podcast. We got another one of those stories today, so you're ready for it.
Let's go, Steve.
All right. James Wright, known as Jim, was born in Logan County, West Virginia in March 1851. Now, when Jim was 13 in 1864, he witnessed his father Samuel being kidnapped by Confederates. Samuel, a Unionist, was murdered by these men nearby, and his son swore revenge. 10 years later, a now grown Jim Wright was accused of murdering a former Confederate said to have been involved in his father's kidnapping and death. Since this murder happened in Kentucky, authorities there put out a reward for Wright's capture, causing Jim to flee to Texas to evade arrest.
Well, Steve, once things cooled down, Wright returned to marry a Hancock County, Tennessee woman by the name of Margaret Peggy Johnson. The couple then moved to Pike County, Kentucky in the 1880s, where they ended up raising 10 children. After the death of Jim Wright's mother, Elizabeth, the family moved to Edson, Tennessee in Hawkins County. But trouble was about to rear its ugly head once again.
Oh, yes, indeed it was. On February 28th, 1891, Wright decided to settle a score with another man, Joe Owens. He and Owens encountered each other at Kyle's Ford in Hancock County that day, where Jim Wright shot and killed him. Now, Rod, there are two accounts of the motive for this shooting. In the first one, the murder happened because Owens was one of the men who kidnapped and killed Samuel Wright back in 1864, and Jim was avenging his father's death. The other holds that the killing was over an argument about the meaning of some verses in the Bible. Now, which do you think was the proper one?
I don't think it was the latter by any means. I think it was probably that first one that you mentioned.
I think that's a safe bet.
Yes.
Well, after this murder, Jim Wright again went on the lam, ending up this time in Missouri. While there, he changed his name to Lewis Curry and committed bigamy by marrying Florence Gloyd, the 18-year-old daughter of a Missouri doctor. Now, he wasn't as lucky this time as he was last time, though. His true identity was soon discovered, and he was arrested on August 25th by the sheriff of Douglas County, Missouri. The sheriff started at once by train with his prisoner to Hancock County, but, Wright gave him the slip by jumping off that moving train, then running away. 1 month later, he was recaptured and this time brought safely back to Rogersville, Tennessee, before being returned to Hancock County, where he was placed in chains in the Sneedville jail.
Well, those chains remained on Wright until early December, when the jailer, probably, we're just guessing here, but probably taking pity on him, decided to remove them. Well, within days, it became clear that that was not just a big mistake, but it was a huge mistake. Because on December 3rd, 1891, Jim Wright and another prisoner managed to escape from the Sneedville jail. Wright made his way to Pumpkin Valley in Hawkins County, to the home of his sister and brother-in-law, Aaron and Mary Jane Templeton. There he hid out, hoping things would settle down enough for him to return home.
Unfortunately for both Jim Wright and his brother-in-law, that wasn't to be the case. On March 17, 1892, the Hancock County Sheriff, Clint Legier, and the posse that he had organized came to the Templeton home. Shots soon rang out and a gun battle ensued. In the gunfire, Aaron Templeton was shot and killed by Sheriff Legier. In the confusion, Jim Wright, barefoot, wearing night clothes and hiding out upstairs, decided it would be a good time to make his escape. So he threw a rope out the window, climbed down, got on the ground, where he was spotted by a deputy who then gave chase but was almost immediately shot and killed. In the confusion, it's not known, Rod, if he was shot by someone inside the house or by one of his own men.
Well, Wright, meanwhile, managed to outrun the posse that was hot on his heels through several inches of snow. He then ran for several hundred yards in a creek before crossing over to the other side, thus evading his trackers. He was safe, but not for long, because on April 25th, 1892, Wright was found and captured by Sheriff Legier and returned to the Sneedville jail. And that's where he was kept under tight guard until his trial. That trial happened to be in September of 1892.
On September 16th, Wright was sentenced to a life in prison for the murder of Joe Owens and sent to the state penitentiary at Petros, Brushy Mountain. He didn't stay there long, though, Rod. On November 5th, 1897, Jim Wright managed to escape Brushy Mountain and return to Hancock County, a $500 bounty on his head. Guess how much that would be today?
Oh, that would probably be somewhere in the neighborhood around $16,000, Steve?
To be precise, $15,691. Even with that bounty, Wright remained free for the next 4 years, enough time for him to exact more revenge.
Wow. On July 19th, 1901, Hawkins County Sheriff Clinton Legier was ambushed and shot to death near a mill at Big Creek, allegedly by Jim Wright and his nephews, John and Albert Templeton. The story goes that the two Templeton boys had dug the bullets out of the porch at their home and swore to use them to end the life of the man that shot their father, Aaron Templeton, at that shootout at the Templeton home in Pumpkin Valley back in 1892. All three fled to Scott County, Virginia. Still, Wright and the Templetons remained free until finally a man named Tump Crabtree is said to have told authorities where the men could be found. A posse was formed and found the gang at Piney Grove in Hawkins County, Tennessee, on the night of September 7th, 1902. Wright, as always, managed to escape, this time with a .45 caliber bullet in his abdomen, cussing and shooting as he went. He managed to shoot a pistol out of the hands of one of the posse members, George Wolfe, as he escaped.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's pretty cool shooting there. I'm telling you there, partner.
Indeed. A fierce gun battle ensued between the posse and the Templetons, along with one of Jim Wright's sons, George Washington Wright, who was with him. Templeton was shot and killed, and George Wright surrendered. Albert was arrested and placed in the Knoxville jail for safekeeping, where he mysteriously died on December 23rd, 1902. And by 8 o'clock that morning, the group of lawmen had tracked Jim Wright down, and another gun battle ensued, in which Wright shot and wounded posse member Jack Robinson in the arm. After that, I guess they kind of had enough of him, so he was killed in a volley of shots, literally riddling his body with bullets.
Well, the bodies of Wright and Templeton were taken back to Gate City by wagon, where they were displayed in the alley between the courthouse and the jail for everyone to see that the two were finally dead. The family took possession and they were prepared for burial in Hawkins County. Now, prior to the burial, the bodies were viewed by an estimated, get this, Steve, big numbers, especially back in those days, estimated 3,000 people came to view the bodies.
Holy cow, that's more than live in Gate City now, much less back then, I'd say. That's a ton of folks. Well, here's some interesting little tidbits for you. John Templeton may have had a premonition about his end. There is a story that John, a very superstitious man, had a recurring dream of his own death. On September 7th, he'd supposedly taken a fitful nap, then awoke, declaring that he had had that dream again and told everyone that he would never sleep again before he died, which turned out to be true, to be quite honest with you. Now, Rod, you remember George Wolfe, the man who'd chased Jim Wright and had that gun shot out of his hands?
Yeah, that rootin' tootin' shooting right there, if that's what I recall.
Absolutely. In July 1911, his body was found on the train tracks near Clinchport, Virginia, wedged between the ties of a cattle guard along the tracks. An autopsy showed that he'd been shot. Nobody was ever charged in his death.
Wow.
And what about Tump Crabtree? Tell us what happened with him.
Well, with Tump Crabtree, Steve, the man who finally disclosed the gang's location back in September of 1902, he ended up getting shot at close range by men believed to have been close friends of Wright's and Templeton's. Although he managed to escape with a wound to his leg, he was ambushed in my old stomping grounds, Dickinson County, Virginia, in February 1903. Ooh. So, I mean, justice was served, I guess, if you want to say that, back in Dickinson County at that time.
Yeah, a bit of rough justice, to be honest with you. I mean,
I'd say so.
People didn't play around back then.
No, and I mean, this revenge thing, we've talked about, again, this Hatfield and McCoy's feud. This sounds almost very similar, except, murder was the name of this game in this entire story, but it was also getting revenge, exacting revenge on people back and forth. And, well, that's exactly what happened this time around.
Well, here's some other little facts that kind of come into this a little bit, okay? There were other people in this gang. Mm-hmm. They were captured before all the fireworks happened there at the end, but there were a few others in that gang. And what they had done, they had gone around Scott County robbing little general stores and other places of business. So people over there were scared to death, terrified, to be honest with you, about the Wright-Templeton Gang. So much so that it took this Tump fella, the only one, to be honest with you, that ratted these folks out. And, well, you saw it got him shot in the leg in the end, to be honest with you. Also, a few years after this, we did a podcast about this fella. You remember Edward Wentz?
Yes.
The fella from Philadelphia whose father owned the coal mines around Big Stone Gap area.
What we know is Westmoreland coal,
yes.
Eventually and stuff, but still.
Yeah. Well, there was a member of that Templeton gang, actually one of the Templetons, who was being held in jail in Knoxville. It wasn't that one son. It was somebody else.
Right.
He was being held in jail in Knoxville, and there was some thought at that time that Templeton might have been the one who had kidnapped and possibly killed Edward Wentz.
Wow.
Yeah, but it turns out he didn't, apparently. But
right.
there was some news articles about him being found with bloody clothes and being in areas where they knew Wentz normally went and all that. So this gang was all over Southwest Virginia and East Tennessee back in the early part of the 20th century.
Well, and I've alluded to this too several times in some historical presentations that I've done. It was almost like organized crime, the mafia back in those days. And, everybody really focuses their attention on the Wild West and everything that was going on. I mean, we've seen TV and shows, the riflemen and Gunsmoke and different things like that. But, most of the stuff, most of the real action was not happening out west as much as it was happening in the Appalachian region.
The Appalachians were the Wild West, to be quite honest with you.
That's exactly right, Steve.
And folks, that's the story of the Wright-Templeton Gang. Another bit of the history of this place we call home, Appalachia. Thanks for listening. You can subscribe to the Stories podcast at Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Amazon Music, TuneIn, Radio Public, and many, many more. Till next we meet. So long, everybody.